Welcome, guys. We're back for another episode of The Lock-In. I'm David Lappin. I am here, as always, with my friend and my colleague, Dara O'Kearney. Dara, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we're going back to our roots here, just the two of us, or at least we're just starting with the two of us. We will be bringing in a special guest later on.
Yeah, so as you've alluded to there, the special guest will be joining us a little bit later on. But in the meantime, let's press on with some of the stories of the week. First up, Gamble Online wrote a piece on a man named Dennis Blieden. And Dara, I know you're going to come in with some personal knowledge of this man, but I'm going to tell the story first of all. Our good pal Paul Seaton over there at Gamble Online has written an excellent piece on this poker player who embezzled millions from his employer. Blieden won the WPT LA Poker Classic back in 2018 for £1 million, defeating, amongst others, Toby Lewis and our good pal Mark McDonnell on the final table. This time he's in the news for the wrong reasons, having stolen from the Los Angeles-based digital company Style Hall Incorporated. The court heard that the embezzlement started just after Blieden left college and that he had taken, over the years, an incredible 22 million quid out of the company. I genuinely really wish we weren't covering another scamming fraud story involving a poker player, but unfortunately there have been quite a few recently. Dara, what did you make of this one when you read about it?
Well, I have to say the first thing I did was when I saw the picture, I said, oh, that guy looks really familiar to me. And then I thought about it for a while and went into my memory bank. And I remember that I played with him, I think 2 years ago in Vegas, my last Vegas, in the area. I think it was an area 25K. And it was a very, very tough table, as you'd expect in a 25K. I do remember Dan Smith-Holla was there, D. Peters was there, and a few other real ballers. And then you had this guy, and he was playing really differently from everybody else. He was playing over half the hands. He seemed to be absolutely terrible post-flop. But he was talking a big game, and he was quite obnoxious. So he did make a sort of an impression on me. To the point that at one of the breaks, I kind of asked one of the other Americans about him, and they told me the full story. At this stage, it was already known that he'd taken 22 million from his employer. His legal case was pending, I guess. And they were just like, they were just amazed at the brazenness that he was still showing up and playing 25Ks with the stolen money, apparently. I mean, poker does attract these type of people because, you know, they can go around, they can splash, they can buy into a 25K if they have the money. I mean, this guy won a WPT, so like once in a blue moon, you'll run so good you'll actually win a tournament, and that seems to add legitimacy to the fact that you're a poker pro. We're always going to see these type of people in poker because it does attract that sort of type of person. It's unfortunate that we do keep getting these stories about scammers and other people, but you know, this guy was a scammer before poker. He's essentially a scammer who came into poker.
I got to say now, I did hear some messages come in your phone there. That's not from our lawyers. We're not in legal jeopardy here because I don't even have to use the word allegedly on this one because it's actually done and dusted. It's a court case. So, he was playing ETO, by the way, there, embezzlement theory optimal. When you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got 22 million in your back pocket from your side hustle, what's a 25K? Like you can really shoot the breeze and play every hand.
Well, that sort of brings me to a tweet that went out a couple of days ago by Mike Timex McDonald, who I don't know if he was addressing this particular thing, or I guess he was probably just sort of tapping into the zeitgeist of the moment, maybe. But he said, I've got to give a shout out to everyone who could have scammed but didn't. Now, obviously, some tongue in cheek here. With no live poker, this has been the year where most poker players have been financially hurting. It's also been the year where the most people with flawless reputations have pulled off giant scams. For every selfish person out there who rugs our community, there are probably 20 more with their back against the wall who chose to take their losses on the chin rather than socialize them. If you clicked a mouse and lost a house, at least you still have your integrity. Be careful out there. Don't hard vouch for people. Don't bet sports. Don't margin trade. Video call for any transactions. Close your poker shares account, lol. Hopefully going forth, these absurd exit scams, as he put it, are on our community will slow down. And obviously we all agree with that. It was an interesting take on, I suppose, like what has been a glut of these types of stories. Dara, your thoughts on that notion of an exit scam?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. It has always sort of been a feature of poker. It's usually somebody who has a good reputation, and you know, it used to be the case that when you went bust in poker, you were done unless you had friends who lend you money or whatever. Now it seems the trajectory is more like go bust, get staked, get to the point where nobody will stake you anymore, and then borrow money and disappear off into the sunset. And it's not even just the recent players. I mean, I was talking to a Norwegian a few years ago, and we were talking about the Norwegian Championship coming up in Dublin specifically, and he said they're going to be very badly hit this year for two reasons. Number one, half the people in Norway owe money to the other half playing on one of these dodgy apps, so they don't want to show. They won't want to show up. And number two, a very famous Norwegian player, I guess I better not say his name, but I'm sure everybody will guess who I'm talking about, who died recently, died owing almost everybody in Norway a significant amount of money. So the Norwegian poker economy was completely decimated. And this was somebody who had, like, you know, would have been regarded as a legend of the game. I think poker players are so used to thinking what's the most plus EV thing that it's not unexpected that they, you know, a poker player on the way out would think, okay, well, I have good reputation now. I can go up and borrow money off so-and-so.
What's it worth?
Yeah, I heard Berkey and Soto actually openly discussing this on their podcast. They had a very funny take on it too. They were trying to work out how much money they thought that Berkey could get away with, given his reputation, and they figured it was north of 1 million. So,
oh yeah, probably, or more even.
That's a fairly big incentive to a lot of players. I mean, if you can make 1 million and then just disappear, and you know, criminal proceedings are almost never pressed in these cases, because it's all like, you know, online transfers, money handed over in a casino, etc., etc. Most poker players don't want to deal with the hassle of trying to prove an actual fraud. So yeah, it's definitely a crime of opportunity. And I mean, I kind of agree with Mike. It's somewhat surprising it doesn't happen more often, given that the rewards are potentially so large and the penalties are not that great.
Well, you bring me nicely to my next point on this, which is Blieden. I like Blieden because it's a nice phrase in an Irish colloquialism.
It looks like a German name, so I'm going to go with Blieden.
Yeah, we'll go with Blieden. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in federal prison. I know prosecutors were pushing for 8.5 years, but he ultimately got a bit of sympathy by pointing to his crippling gambling addiction. In Paul's excellent article, he said, "Don't gamble away all your money" is a trite phrase, but this week it has been proved almost optimistic when placed side by side with what Blieden did. He gambled away millions of other people's money. Now, kind of picking up on what you said just a moment ago there, Dara, one problem is that there are a lot of these scams being perpetrated and there is no legal recourse. You know, there just is no place to go. I suppose the sort of gentleman's wager area is where it's kind of left. Courts don't want to kind of weigh in on this stuff, and therefore it sort of exists in a sphere of trust. In fact, even it's fair to say a lot of the big bookmakers are sort of living in that sphere. Now, their reputation is obviously something that can't be tarnished without there being a huge penalty to them in the eyes of the public. But, you know, do you have an opinion on, I suppose, how delicate we leave ourselves and why trust is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I did write about this in my blog about scammers and how they operate in poker and why it's so easy for them to get away with it. It is the fact that we do all have to trust each other, and, you know, we trust each other in swaps, for example, that, you know, I swap with you, and if by some miracle you actually cash, you'll send me the money, and vice versa.
Scandalous to say miracle. Scandalous to say miracle.
But yeah, I mean, we do operate in this element of trust, and poker players' attitude to money is different from most people. It's not just money; it's also a tool of the trade. So we do feel sympathetic to people when, for whatever reason, they have a short-term shortage, which effectively puts them out of the game, and that makes us more likely to transfer or give them a loan. I mean, anytime I talk to non-poker players about this, they're just staggered at the very idea that we would send relatively large sums of money to other poker players that we don't even know that well. I mean, Blieden is being so two-faced on this, essentially, like, because when I ran into him, he was very much acting like the big baller pro. He had just won a WPT, and he was like, "Oh, I'm a great poker player, surrounded by all these other great poker players." That was his attitude. Now in court, he's crying that he's a problem gambler. I would be slightly worried too that you know, this might be scammers might see this as an opportunity to present themselves in this way. Oh, I'm about to be caught for this huge fraud I pulled off. I'll go play a few 25Ks and claim I have a gambling problem. I honestly don't think that's a good line of defense.
Yeah, and I think as well, what sort of undermines it is, like, if you made some huge impulsive mistake, if you did something sort of reckless, like put all your money onto a gambling site and try to spin it up, or whatever way you might, maybe just put it all, mortgage your house to put it all on the blackjack or whatever, you can kind of go, well, that does seem really, but if this guy's just been leaking money every few months out of a company, he had a lot of opportunities to kind of maybe recognize the error of his way. And it does make it a little bit unlikely that suddenly it's a gambling problem. Although, who knows? I don't want to. I don't want to maybe judge it as a real thing, but I am inclined to be suspicious, like yourself there, Dara. Well, look, thank you very much for that story, Paul Seaton and Gamble Online. If you want to read the full story, go to the news section of gambleonline.co. It is well worth a look. Next up, the US Poker Open. Well, I have to say, I watched an awful lot of this. I actually found this to be exceptionally good entertainment. US Poker Open was 12 high-stakes tournaments played over 13 days in the area. The event was streamed on Poker Go. Ali Imsirovic took the lead in the final week, but was overtaken ultimately by defending champion David Peters, who won 3 events out of, I think, 4 or 5 going down the home straight. Vanessa Cade was also in the mix, making 2 final tables. So was Steve Zolotow, blast from the past there, who made 3 final tables. Ultimately, the main event, the 50K, the big one right at the end, was won by Sean Winter. I think he took home around $750,000 for that one. But when Sam Soverell bust the main event in 5th place, that meant that Peters was unassailable and he was crowned the US Poker Open leaderboard champion for the second time, back to back, even though there was none in 2020. He won in 2019 and 2021. That's good enough for a back-to-back in my book. Dara, how fucking good is David Peters?
He's extremely good. He's definitely one of the best players I've played against. I played against him deep in a number of tournaments in Vegas, including my second deepest run. He makes your life an absolute misery. He's very much of the sort of generation of players who came through the solvers. He lives, sleeps, and drinks with the solvers. We were talking to his girlfriend at I think maybe the Nottingham Millions, and asking what does he do when he's not playing, because he doesn't play that much online and he just kind of shows up for the high rollers. And she said he spends 16 hours a day studying with the solvers 7 days a week. That's the sort of level of commitment that you need to get to that sort of high roller echelon now, which he has been in and dominated. Yeah, no, he's extremely good. He's also incredibly emotionally controlled, and it's not just at the poker table. I remember standing behind him at a queue in Vegas to enter a tournament, and he was looking at his phone. So we get to the top of the queue, and he's still looking at his phone, so he doesn't notice that he's being called forward. And the guy between him and me starts freaking out, screaming at him, saying, "You're holding things up, buddy. Get a move on there." And Peters just kind of looked at him like as just to sort of like see what was happening, to process it. There was no emotional reaction. There was nothing. There was like, oh, right, this guy is angry. And the reason he's angry is because I haven't moved to the front of the table. I wonder if he's going to hit me or do something. I guess that seemed to be the reaction. It was just complete and utterly unemotional. So I think having that sort of approach to life in general also stands him in good stead when he's playing these things. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, he's incredibly good. There have been a few hands that I played against him that had caused me the most problem. And the interesting thing, when I talk to people about what I should have done in the hand, it always boils down to what their view of him is. They either think he's always bluffing because he's Deep Peters, or they think he's never bluffing because he's looking at me thinking, I can't bluff this guy. This is an old man coffee calling station. So whereas I think the reality is actually in between. I think he's almost perfectly balanced. He probably plays closer to GTO than almost anybody else in the world.
Yeah, he is an absolute phenom. We spoke to John Duthie on the last Chip Race episode. Check that one out if you can, guys, about how coverage of poker has sort of moved. It's segued away from TV. I guess, the sites aren't willing to pay for these hour-long ad spots anymore. And it's moved to the Twitch streams that we all watch in the evenings. And, of course, now to a designated stream platform in Poker Go. I do say I must say, I do agree with John's take that this is a positive thing and that PokerGo really do it very well. You know, there may have been a couple of teething problems right at the beginning, but I got to say, Carrie Katz and Co know what they're doing. And I thought it was particularly in evidence with this excellent coverage. I really enjoyed watching this event over all the days. What do you think, Dara, about the way poker coverage has moved away from TV and into Twitch streams and now PokerGo?
Yeah, well, it's not like it's a conscious decision. The reality is TV just lost interest in poker, and therefore we had to find some alternative. It's also a case that it's a very different poker world now and a very different poker audience. Most people who watch poker these days know quite a lot about poker. It's a fairly expert. So you know, the old thing of having to show people the hand rankings at the start of every show, that doesn't really come into it anymore. People expect fairly high level commentary. They don't want people, you know, freaking out over a standard flip where queens get in against ace queen. They're looking for a bit more nuanced coverage than that. The problem is we're not really attracting new people with that. But I guess that's what Twitch is for. Twitch in general, you do get people who sort of stumble on to, you know, watching Ian Simpson or whoever, and you know, if they can put up with Ian Simpson screeching every 10 minutes and the volume being all over the place, they might actually stick around. But yeah, until we get back TV coverage on a major scale, this is probably the best we can do. But I think it is more about customer retention than customer acquisition.
Great point. Well, on to the next story. This is potentially the thorniest and most kind of complicated and nuanced one we've had to cover for a while. Last Saturday, Ruben Costa issued a statement via Twitter saying, "I'm no longer going to be a member of ACR Stormers. They've treated me well, and there is a lot of nice people involved with the program. I'm sure most of you know why I don't want to be part of it anymore. If you were around this evening, I refuse to be disrespected." Now, the disrespect to which he referred was how that night on Twitch stream, Phil Nagy, the CEO of ACR, former guest of the show, we've spoken to Phil a few times over the years, made several really gross sexual comments, the worst of which was when he told Ruben's girlfriend that he would give Ruben a full-time contract if she blew him. Some people, including ACR pro Vanessa Cade, have pointed to the overall vibe of the stream, which was undoubtedly provocative and blue, and perhaps it even resembled like the kind of close friends drunk chats that people have from time to time when sex and different different subjects like that just come into the mix. But the key problem here is threefold. One, it wasn't a private chat between friends. It was streamed for a live audience. Two, there is an imbalance of power there with Phil Nagy, the CEO of ACR, present. And as such, these types of comments aren't delivered from a place of equality where it can really be seen as banter in the same way. It's delivered very differently, certainly from the point of view of other people in the conversation. And three, Nagy's specific comment is beyond the pale anyway. He overstepped the line of decency even within the context of that kind of drunk friends chat, let alone if you factor in the power dynamic I mentioned. So I got to say, Dara, this story, it sort of hit home for me because, as you know, several years ago, Daniel Negreanu made a similarly gross comment about my girlfriend, and he was a Stars pro at the time. Now, I have no association with him. We weren't connected anyway. We were, I suppose, having a disagreement in a public sphere at the time, and he just brought in a really ugly non sequitur, which was pretty gross. But I wanted to know what you thought when you heard this. I suppose I had that personal maybe pang or remembrance of, you know, what it might have been like for Ruben and his girlfriend, and I was just interested to know what you thought when you first heard it.
Yeah, before I get on to my personal take on it, I would say there's a slight difference between this and the situation with Negreanu and Sharon, in that Negreanu didn't really know you and certainly didn't know Sharon, which to my mind makes it even worse, because like, why do you drag somebody into the conversation in those horrible terms? That's different from what feels like a bunch of friends hanging around, escalating the sexual banter, and then somebody does undoubtedly step over the line. Unfortunately, it isn't the latest example of men behaving badly in poker, and that's that just keeps coming up time and time again. And is poker does have a problem on this front, and it is something which needs to be eradicated. It won't happen overnight, unfortunately. It reminded me on a certain level of back in my working days in the corporate world, and you're at the Christmas party with your work colleagues, and this sort of stuff comes up. Everybody's drunk, and people. It's the sexual tensions between people in the workplace starts to become get overtly expressed, and there's a lot of banter back and fro, and for the most part it's fine, but then somebody steps over the line and everybody kind of goes, oh wait a minute, that's too much. And I think that's essentially what Phil did here. It's even worse when it's the boss who steps over the line, because that causes a problem because of the power dynamic and the power imbalance between the two people. It's pretty common, I would have to say. Bosses are human too, and they sometimes do go over the line and behave badly. I think the key thing is how they react after the event. In almost every case that happened at an office party that I attended, the boss was incredibly apologetic when he sobered up, and everybody was sort of deeply embarrassed about it. And for the most part, people were forgiving, so long as it's a sort of like an isolated drunken incident. If it's part of a bigger pattern, it's a bigger problem, obviously, and needs to be addressed. So I think the two things are, first of all, you need a groveling apology, which Nagy spent 2 days giving. So that's a good sign. And secondly, you need better behavior going forward, a commitment to better behavior going forward. So I think that's the most important aspect, rather than the unfortunate incident, which now has happened and is out there. I also think, I mean, I realize the irony of saying this while I'm talking about this on our show, but people just piling on from every angle. It's kind of unnecessary. This is really mostly between the people involved themselves. Now, Barry Carter did make a funny tweet where he said that the best thing about Twitter drama is when people are not at all involved make themselves involved so that they can fight out old feuds. And that you can definitely see that happening here. People are using this as an excuse to pile on people that they don't like, whether it's Phil Nagy or Vanessa Kate, who's also been dragged into it.
Well, I want to come to that, actually. I did reach out to Ruben the day after this all happened. I was interested to know if he and his girlfriend were okay and how they were feeling about it all. Suffice to say, they were both very upset. And I think he was still processing, or they were still processing what had happened, and whether he even wanted to engage with Nagy's apologies, which were already sort of on the table, if you like. Nagy had offered up a mea culpa, publicly apologizing and, I should say, groveling in a few ways. I have a few of these tweets. I wrote them down. He said, "Boy, I can't express what a piece of shit I feel like. No, I am it's badly written, but no, I am make fun of the people I like, but never ever want to hurt anyone. Ruben, I was out of line. I apologize. But if you ever respond, I will respect. If you never respond, I will respect that as well. You have my respect and my apology. I am so sorry." He also added a further acknowledgement on his bad behavior in response to other people's tweets, as you say, other people were getting involved. He said, "I crossed the line, scratch that. I should have been punched in the face. I wish there was something I could do to make it right." He also said, "Ruben is such a good guy and I feel lower than a snake's belly." To Melissa Schubert, who Nagy also made some sexual comments about, she said, "Repeated sexual comments from a CEO should never be tolerated, and it was only a matter of time." He curtly responds, "You are correct." So again, a sort of an admission of having done wrong here. There's been some debate already comparing this situation to the Bilzerian stuff from several months ago. And while it's easy to see the area of overlap, we're not, it is obvious there. There are some substantial differences too. How significant is the fact that Nagy was quick to apologize and acknowledge what he did immediately?
I mean, it's very significant. There's a difference between somebody who does something wrong, realizes they did something wrong, and immediately apologizes for it and accepts what they did wrong, and somebody who just doubles down and doesn't think they did anything wrong. The second type of person is going on perpetuating the myth that this is okay. I don't think anybody looking at Nagy will think, "Oh, I should make these kind of comments to females now," because they see the reaction he's getting. They see the fact that he has to sort of grovel in public. So in many ways, it's actually something which might put people off doing this sort of bad behavior. compared to somebody who, openly revels in the fact that this is what he does. He treats women like objects, and that's just what he does. And you have lots of teenage boys who think that's brilliant. That's the way to do it. He's an incredibly successful man with a great life. That's what I aspire to. So I think there is a huge difference there.
Yeah, one of the ways that, and you alluded to it a moment ago, that it's been related to Bilzerian is how Vanessa Cade, a pro now for ACR, has been dragged into the story. Again, I see why some people would see that as relevant, because Vanessa has been a champion of people standing up to misogyny, and this is a clear case of misogyny by her boss. Just as Diva Byrne, an advocate for women in poker, was a small part of the Bilzerian story, given the specific role she took on in the aftermath of what Bilzerian had said, that gross tweet to Vanessa. So too now, I suppose, Vanessa is a small part of the story, as people are suggesting that if she did nothing or said nothing, she would be very hypocritical. Well, what I can say is, from having spoken to Vanessa immediately after all this had happened, it wasn't the case that she was doing or saying nothing. She was actually communicating with both sides behind the scenes. She very much saw this as an opportunity to help repair this or fix this or make this sort of a situation that could be a learning experience for not just the people involved, but maybe the onlookers. Like you pointed out, Dara, it's obviously a healthy situation if people are seeing someone grovel and feel this bad about what they did, and maybe that acts as a lesson going forward. Before I read Vanessa's specific statement, though, Dara, I was interested to know your thoughts on how it's obviously ironic at some level. We talked about this back when we were talking about all these things a few months ago, that women are being dragged into these messes that essentially men have created. And actually, tangibly, they're being hurt just as much, if not worse, than the men who perpetrated these awful things in the first place. But then also there is this pushing against that as a tension. There is this expectation for consistency from any man or woman, and I suppose Vanessa in this case having, platformed herself as someone who was really happy to speak out when she really felt like something was very wrong months ago, as it is again now.
Yeah, I think the consistency thing is definitely a justified expectation. I mean, it is very unfortunate that somehow Vanessa is supposed to don her Supergirl costume now and fix all this after a guy, essentially her boss, has overstepped the line. I mean, the hypocrisy runs both ways too. It's notable that some of the people shouting the loudest about this are people who thought there was absolutely nothing wrong with what Bilzerian said to Vanessa in the first place. So there's hypocrisy on both sides. For sure. Vanessa is in a very difficult situation, and I mean, it does kind of come down to who you trust in these cases. I personally trust Vanessa to do the best possible thing in this case and to try and sort it out as well as possible. But that's based on the fact that I like Vanessa. I trust her. I don't think she's motivated by anything other than a desire to improve the culture in poker, et cetera. But those are all judgments made by me. Other people will look at her and maybe take a different view and see it all through a very different prism. So it becomes very, very difficult to talk about these things, because it does kind of come down to, well, who do you trust?
Well, I want to read Vanessa's statement. I actually think it was, as usual, very well articulated by her, but it does bring up some of these issues. She said, "This stream, broadcast by people I consider friends and created and run by a woman, is called Slut Pulls, and literally they turn everything into a sex joke incessantly, openly joking about blowing each other and genitals and jizz. It's funny, but 10 out of 10 explicit, extreme dirty jokes and banter." Phil regularly participated in these streams with his friends and joined in the conversation. I want to be clear, I think Phil's comments are out of line, even though they absolutely fit in with the theme of the show and the way people talk to each other there. He forgets there is a power dynamic that can't be ignored, and he needs to be mindful of this. An apology and change behavior feels right to me here, though it's up to the other parties. Phil has spent the last 2 days publicly apologizing, which was accepted by the original poster before others decided to blow it up for their own clout. Even before my recent wins, when money was tight, I stood up against companies like GG Poker, who promoted the physical abuse and demeaning of women, even though it was almost certainly going to hurt what small income I had at the time. If possible, I'm even now less motivated by money. Although I do think it's generally a bad idea, I do not believe that participating in inappropriate comments in a stream entirely built on inappropriate comments is even remotely equivalent to a man, Bilzerian, who has spent a lifetime abusing and demeaning women. I genuinely think all of the people are good and no one meant any harm, obviously. Otherwise, why would you ever say it in a public forum? The irony of this is that people are calling for me to leave ACR on the basis of misogyny, hypocrisy, are almost exclusively the ones who had a problem working with GG Poker despite having a working relationship with GG Poker.
Who had no problem, I think.
Oh, sorry. Despite having worked with, having a proven abuser on staff, I apologize, I misspoke there, and refused to see how this is not remotely equivalent. The fact that I'm getting the brunt of negative feedback here and not the people responsible is again ironic, as people call for a woman to pay for a man's mistake. That said, the money is dust to me, and though I think this has been made to appear worse than it should be, a CEO should know better than to say things that like this, even in a joking context. I will take the next few days to carefully consider the situation and decide if further action is warranted. So she's sort of...
Yeah, just before you go on, I think, I mean, this isn't an edited show, but I do think you said it's the people who had a problem. She actually said it's the people who had no problem, which is a very, very different statement.
You're absolutely right, and I'm looking back, and it did say no problem. So thank you for correcting me there, and so there would be no misunderstanding. We definitely don't want that. I guess Vanessa has sort of teased or cliffhangered a to be continued from her own perspective, whether that's her deeply considering leaving ACR, whether it's her considering another statement where she wants to make it clear that maybe further talks with both sides have happened, or further, I suppose, maybe introspection has taken place from her. Maybe she wants to see how it plays out and how all parties respond, which is sort of understandable too. Although I certainly think with Vanessa, you're going to get a response that comes from a sort of a personally held moral point of view than necessarily, the prevailing winds of the time. But again, she's probably secondary to this. What's really important is Ruben and his girlfriend and Phil Nagy, and what you want to see is Phil Nagy take responsibility, which he's done, and hopefully make amends if he's able to. And I don't know how that happened. I don't know how you make amends for saying something as awful as that, but I think if there is a way, he probably intends to do it. I'm certainly interested in knowing what Ruben and his girlfriend think, but also I respect their right to privacy if they just want to fucking leave it, because it felt to me like when I spoke to him right after it happened, one of the things he really didn't like was how it was being blown up, and now it's been blown up more than ever. And I know we're adding to that, but I hope we're adding a rational voice to it at the very least, even if, it is making it or amplifying it as a story. Look, I think this is a really tough situation, Dara. I think you've spoken very eloquently on the complications around it. I'm not quite sure, the level of penance that needs to be dished out now, but I hope that we can kind of get past it. I was interested that Berkey responded to Vanessa. He wrote a little thread tweet, and the end of that, he said, it's not that you're expected to defend or pay the penance for ACR's action, but rather you're expected to be consistent with your vocal moral stance against misogyny. You earned a spotlight both in speaking out and in shining bright on the felt. With it comes higher standards. I think you would agree that that's very fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, Berkey's always on the spot about these things. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a situation where we just kind of have to let the principals sort it out among themselves and see what happens. Vanessa will obviously make her own decision at the end of that. Phil has already done the apologizing part. The other part he has to do is sort of the redress and, vow and take steps to do better in future.
Well, at this point, we are going to bring in our special guest. He is online poker legend, a Twitch streamer, and he recently joined Team Pro at Poker Stars, better known as TonkaaaaP. He is Parker Talbot. Parker, welcome to the lock-in, and get yourself on screen and stop going off screen right now.
Point. You're like, he recently joined Team Poker Stars, and I was like, man, you're so fucking right. Let me get my patch on here.
Whoa, we can't be doing patches
here. Sorry about that.
Be done, Davis.
Let me give me a moment here. Yeah, yes, sir. Here we go. There we go. I see you have a nice Unibet one, but this one's a little bit cooler. So, no. Sorry, let's get back to...
No, that's fine. That's nice and small. We can blur that out easy. Look, we have a very specific reason for having you on the show this week. We want to preview the third heads-up duel between Daniel Negreanu and the seemingly unbeatable Phil Hellmuth. Now, I do say unbeatable. However, You did beat him back in 2017. Remarkably, that makes you, I think, one of only 2 or 3 people to beat him in the last 5 years heads up. I think his record something like 26 from 29 heads up victories.
I got insanely lucky, obviously. I mean, it's the only way you can beat the white magic. I did actually get like really lucky in like one hand that we played together. That was like an elimination hand, I think. I can't remember it exactly, but like, I don't know. Hellmuth made like some crazy like overbet on the turn, and I called with a flush draw and like banged it off. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like a great little hand where I like dinked it off on. That was when like Hellmuth like gets up in the match. He's walking around, pacing around, talking to himself, and I was like, "This is it. This is the greatest moment of my poker career." You know.
I remember that. I remember you just like, "This is the life. I'm sitting here playing."
Yeah. This is like.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that guy's a genius. I didn't watch the second match between Hellmuth and D-Negs, but I watched the first one, and yeah, it kind of looked like Negreanu just like bowled him over, and then like Hellmuth just won. I don't know. It's crazy, yeah. But he crushed him. He did.
Yeah, white magic in action again. Dara, sorry, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that Tonkaa's comment there about the life against Hellmuth, getting Hellmuth to go off against you, reminded me of a comment Maria Konnikova did in an interview recently where she was asked about would you ever show your cards, and she said that the advice she got from Eric Seidel at the start was never show your cards unless you have to, with one specific exception: if you can show a bluff to Hellmuth, you absolutely should.
That's a pretty good exception.
That's a good exception. I like that too. Okay, so more generally, you gave your take there on when you played in 2017 and the fun and games you guys had. But having seen it up close, and I guess not too many people have seen Hellmuth's heads up game up close, what do you think of it? Like, do you think there is some magic? Do you think there is some skill? Do you think there is just like a ridiculous run of good fortune taking place as well?
Definitely a combo of all of the above, right? Like, I feel like there's like, I mean, Hellmuth has literally done this battle his entire poker career, right? Of like people telling him he's shit and him being like, well, you know, I never don't win, so I'm not shit, you know? He's like, I've just won my entire career, so how can you call me shit? And I would say it's like definitely a mixed bag of like, you know, just intuition for like the game, right? Like he obviously knows what's up. Like he smashed the game back in the good old day, like back when, you know, there wasn't all these tools to get better at the game, right? When it really was just mono, like fucking put your balls on the table on who's the best card player. And he smashed then too, right? So, but I would say that it's a combination of all the things, like, you know, probably a lifetime good run of good luck. Like, I don't think that's unreasonable to say that, like, you know, over a million hands, however many hands, millions of hands, 100, I don't know how many hands Phil Hellmuth's played lifetime, but like he almost certainly has run above expectation in his important situations, in his deep spots in tournaments, you know. But I would also say that he's like a hand reader like nobody else, you know, like he really does. And you know, I think as much as you can take away from live tells and stuff like that, I do think that they exist. And again, I think, you know, he's a wizard at that as well. So I think he's like very good at all of the hand reading abilities and like live pro like features, while also just having a sick intuition and almost certainly just running above expectation his entire poker career in big moments. That would be my guess of how Phil Hellmuth has done it. And fucking white magic, because man, he has got that shit coming out of every angle.
Yeah, one thing I would say on one thing I would say on that is one area where he was definitely miles ahead of the curve was on short stack play. He used to do all this stuff of like, you know, limping off short stacks, etc. Mm-hmm. People thought was absolutely terrible, and then Pisano started doing it online, and suddenly
people thought it was terrible then too. Though it's not like not like Pisano started doing it, and then everyone was like, "Oh, this is okay." Limp holding from 5 bigs and like the final table under the gun. You know, like that's not the way it was. He was mocked just as much for that as somebody is. But you're right though. He definitely started like the trend of like limping off of like 10 blinds or something like way before. But he also did it with like he would like limp fold like 9 big blinds with like A7 or something. You know, like outrageous. Not like the way we do it these days with like limp folding like 7-5 offsuit because you know you want to play a few more hands. Hellmuth was taking like super profitable jams and like turning them into like limp folds kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. There was one hand I remember from years and years ago. I think it was for the WPT finale where he limp folded off like a 2.5 big blind stack on the button. And everybody just went like, this is absolutely horrendous. This is absolutely terrible.
But like, that's one of those things that's indefensible, no? Sorry.
Well, actually, this was an interesting one because it was the final table bubble. So a lot of people thought, well, what happened was behind him, the small blind moved in moved all in, and then the big blind moved all in over that. So he was thinking, oh, there's a very good chance I could make the final table here. So a lot of people thought it was like final table equity. He gets to wear his Aria hat on the.
Well, that just sounds like a good play, honestly. Now that you say it like that, I mean, if he literally had 2.5 big blinds, what he should have done is min raise so that the small blind can't come in for that half a big blind and like basically like collude to take him out, because like he only has 2 big blinds. So like that is like totally. That's actually like a very reasonable strategy that like I learned playing sit and goes, because like you have 6 players in sit and go, you have 2 players, obviously you're ICM and you know all about it, but yeah, like if you're on a bubble or whatever and say you're the middle stack, you raise like half of your stack on the button, and then if both of the blinds get it all in, you leave, or if you're the bottom stack rather, you leave yourself the option to fold, them to clash, you get in the money. So like that scenario that you just mentioned like legit sounds like totally reasonable actually.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Like at the time, the tools weren't there to evaluate. Everybody said this is terrible. Like you can't do that. And but when the tools came around, I did eventually run the spot, and he was.
He's right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Like that sounds totally plausible. Like I said, you probably want to min raise, keep that half blind, and squeeze out that small blind that's going to come in and try to needle you out. But yeah, that sounds definitely reasonable.
Yeah, there was certainly method to the madness. Well, Tonka, this streak of Hellmuth is obviously an extreme outlier. Like that's. White magic skills, being very good at using the Phil Hellmuth image and all of that.
For sure. Yeah.
Still very hard to win this number of games in a row. And this number
I don't know how you do that against D-Negs though. Like use the value of the image of Phil Hellmuth. Like D-Negs is like played arguably like the most with that man, like, over their time. Like
to be fair, to push back on, I think he did in the second match because I think
did he? I didn't watch that one again. Yeah.
In the second match, he had sort of set up that sort of like I'm a bit too tight, and if I'm putting really meaningful.
And then he started kicking his ass or what?
Yeah, and I think he did just kind of like, I think he called it zoom because he always has.
Oh yeah, he made that one really like quick river bluff, right, for like heaps or something like that. Like he did a few things like that. Yeah, I heard about that. That's right.
There was some funky stuff. All right, but look, like Haxton said to us recently, how he just said it was really funny seeing Hellmuth go on a streak like this. It's just hilarious watching Phil Hellmuth dominate.
I mean, it's good content, right? It's good. Like it's good viewing for the viewer for sure.
You have played. Obviously, maybe even more short-handed sit and go poker than anyone else on the planet. I'm interested to know, like that's not the same, but very similar to the kind of experience of variance you would have as a heads-up specialist, say. So I'm interested to know, with that in mind, what is your take on streaks and what can happen and what does happen and what you've experienced?
That's what I mean about him having like an insane good run of cards, right? Because like you can ask the most elite heads up players in the world and they're like, yeah, the amount of times that I've won 27 or 29 heads up matches are like, basically non-existent, I'd say. Like not non-existent, but like, I mean, I'm assuming that if you have like heads up, right? Even if you're like an elite player, like the elitist of elite players, and you play against other strong opponents, you're not going to have higher than like a 51 to like 53% win rate, I would assume, and heads up, like it's heads up, it's like very small margins kind of thing. So like winning like what 27 like pseudo flips in a row, like that seems kind of fucking difficult if you ask me. I don't know, I'm not like an ultra maths guy in terms of calculating the odds on that, like how often that's going to happen, but like yeah, it seems insanely unlikely, and he's really on like the tear of a lifetime when you consider it. Yeah. Before you're talking about this, I saw you tweet about it, I think a while ago, but like I hadn't really considered like how outrageous that really is, like 27 or 29. And I feel, blessed actually, now that I think about it, to be one of his only losses.
Exactly. Well, look, from Phil Hellmuth's incredible positive streak to Negreanu's incredible negative streak, it's got to be said. Last month, John Sofin wrote a piece for Card Chat entitled "Is Daniel Negreanu's legacy on the line in round 3 versus Phil Hellmuth?" I feel like I changed the narrative on this one myself, because I wrote a piece about a month ago, sort of cataloging the bone facts of like Negreanu's record once he got 3-handed, once he got heads up for like the last 9 years or 10 years or whatever it was. It was a big sample size, and freakishly and weirdly he hasn't been able to close.
That's what I mean though. Variance is a joke. Like Hellmuth's literally on the opposite spectrum of it, right? And like I would still argue that like D-Negs is a better player than Hellmuth. Like I feel like it's like kind of like it's one of those, like, I mean Hellmuth will dispute it, but like I feel like it's kind of indisputable,
Well, spoiler alert on John's piece for Cards Chat, but I want to say here that it was one of those ironic question marks in the headline, because he basically makes the case that no, it's not really on the line, and I think that's pretty sensible.
Yeah, how could it be? Yeah, of course.
I'll give a quote from it. He says, given Negreanu's lack of titles for quite some time, it's not unreasonable to think a third straight loss to Hellmuth could shatter much of his legacy, even though I believe that's unfair. The truth is, despite failing to get over the hump and win tournaments, Negreanu has cashed for nearly $23 million since his last WSOP bracelet in 2013. If he hadn't cashed in any poker tournament prior to the start of 2014, he'd still be the 23rd on the all-time money list. So that's impressive enough. Dara, to bring you in here, like, that it isn't fair. It's not fair to sort of put someone's legacy on the line. Poker is about winning money in the end of the day, not about winning titles.
Yeah, absolutely. And Negreanu has been a very successful player, and not just successful, but incredibly consistent over a very long time. Whether he's actually won or not. I mean, yeah, this used to annoy me too, because when I was coming up, people used to say, "Oh, but what have you actually won? Like, what tournaments have you won?"
Yeah,
it was like,
I was just about to say, this is such a shitty metric for measuring.
It's
like,
dreadful, yeah.
I mean, it's the only metric we have, so it's impossible to shy away from. I get it, but like, you know, winning poker tournaments or like deep running poker tournaments is like so much like luck based, right? Like it's so much luck based. Like you can play heaps, you can give yourself a better chance of winning by signing up to bbcpoker.com. Never mind about that. But yeah, you know,
oh my God, you're summoning
there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways that you can, you know, get better at the game and give yourself that extra edge. But yeah, you know, ultimately poker tournaments are just a crazy crapshoot, and it can really go any which way. But yeah, just to get that. But yeah, I think it's just a shitty metric for measuring success.
What happened to you, Parker?
Sorry. I don't know. That's just I saw a good time. I saw a good time for a chuckle. You know, that's what it was. I knew this would be the response, and I couldn't help myself with the chuckle. It wasn't about the fantastic products of bbcpoker.com. You know, it was the laugh that I knew I was going to get out of you guys. Yeah, sorry. I could see it coming.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about the false metrics, I mean, I used to hear this about people used to refer to certain poker players as, oh, they're a closer because they had one or two.
A closer, yeah. Like, how could you be a closer? Like, there are certain aspects that, like, a good player might have compared to like a weaker player deep in a tournament. But like, that's a ridiculous thing to say. You're so right.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean. And and also there people tend to focus exclusively on live. You know, you could have won 1,000 tournaments online, but you're still on a closure because that one time you made a big final table, you came sixth.
Which is a funny thing too, right? Because like, again, live players will dispute this, but I think like within the poker world, within like the industry, like people kind of know that like online player equals generally, you know, more sophisticated, like put more work into the game, right? So like usually it's a better game, a tougher game even. But yeah, you're totally right in that we only give a fuck about live. But that's what's in the media, right? That's what's in the poker media. That's what's covered. That's what we have pictures of. You know, we don't have a picture of Lena sat at his computer in, you know, some greasy like track pants or something that he's been wearing for 4 days in a row, winning, you know, the 17th tournament for $1 million this week. We don't have that. You know, we have the Phil Hellmuths dancing around 7 feet tall, you know, talking about how they have white magic, and that's what sells. You know, that's what the media loves.
Brilliant take. Well, look, despite what he might say, because Negreanu kind of bit back, I think it was on that show, No Gamble, No Future. He was trying to push back on this narrative, and I understand. Obviously, he's well entitled to, and we sort of agree with them. It's weird agreeing with them.
Yeah, like I said, that's there's no way his legacy could be on the line. You say whatever you want, but like, I mean, the man's been in poker like crushed forever. You know, like it's same thing as Hellmuth. It's like, they're impossible people to take things away from, like to shatter their like I don't think that's possible at this point, you know.
Well, look, I do think it's clearly bothering me a little from that pushback that I sense that he's now like, if you can kind of put a moniker on him, it's like, you know, can't close Negreanu kind of thing. He couldn't finish his dinner, to borrow a football parlance. Again, as someone who's experienced streaks, how hard is it to, you know, if you've been on a streak like this, which I'm sure at some point we've all been on, you know, downswing, and it's not really a downswing, but if you just feel like you're not closing or whatever, I know that word.
I've definitely had that too as well. Don't worry.
How hard is it to process, you know, to kind of remain process focused when that monkey on your back's getting heavier all the time?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, like it'll be worse for like the situation that you guys are speaking of too right now, because like it's like a prolonged period of like not very many tournaments over a long period. That's like why like it is a legacy about to get shattered. Like it's a fucking couple heads up like live like sit and goes. You know, it's not like, again, they have so much meaning because it's all we're watching, it's all we're paying attention to. But like 3 heads up sit and goes, like they mean nothing, right? Like they don't determine like who's better or who's worse like at all, in my opinion. But yeah, like for me, it's always been like online, you know, where like the downswings, they come in like shorter periods of time because you can play more hands, you can play more volume and kind of shit. So like it's always easier to blast through them. Whereas like live, I feel like you could be in a funk for fucking 3 years or something like that, you know,
Yeah,
and not get out of it.
Dara, I couldn't help off camera, when you knew you were off camera, you were doing a little prompting thing. I couldn't see, it was only in the side of my vision. I just want to know, are you shilling now? Do you
playing DTO?
Absolutely not shilling. No, I was just playing on DTO, the wonderful app. Since Parker was talking about, you know, ways you can get better, I think DTO is also a wonderful way.
Very good.
I'll shill DTO as well. Don't get me. I don't stand to make any money from DTO, but that's an amazing product. I played a bunch of DTO. I'm a really, really big fan of the product. Honestly, like was a big one, along with not shilling, but like working with BBZ over the last like year and a half, 2 years, like that comboed with like DTO and like running sims on my own is like really like how, like, you know, I feel like I've propelled my game forward over the last like couple of years. But yeah, DTO is an incredible app. Like,
well, I feel like at this point I just have to say, like, are you listening, Dominic? Are you hearing how your partners are working hard for you? Dara did a really clunky segue there, but like
I like over interrupted it to say DTO good, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I set up a better testimonial from TonkaaaaP, so yeah. That's
and look at all this opportunity we're giving BBC here. If Jordan wants to just hit us up with something now, do you want to make it rain, Jordan? We're good with that too. We can find.
Yeah, they're not picky, man. They'll take anyone. I mean, I'm on the show, so fuck.
Well, look, getting back to High Stakes Duel, if you do want to watch the third installment of that excellent show, also a Poker Go show, we were talking about Poker Go earlier on, it will be live on Poker Go next Wednesday, the 23rd of June. I do think it will be good TV, so tune in. Final topic of the week, the Wsop have announced their schedule. I'm sure, Dara, you're very interested in this one. I know you intend on going. I'm still a little on the fence. I'd like to go, but I'm not quite sure. On that schedule, they announced a $500 $5 million guarantee, the reunion on the opening weekend. I guess that's a sort of everyone come back together again. We haven't seen you in a couple of years. There's also a 25k heads up championship that used to be a 10k, so they're making that a bit chunkier. There's a 50k PLO event. That's a very, very chunky event that I imagine there's a certain demographic within the poker world really, really itching for that one. And a 250k, 250,000 super high roller, the largest non-charity event buy-in in WSOP history. Of course, they've had the one drop 1 million thing on, I think, 2 occasions, and a lot of the time that's a 100k or 111k event. But now 250 super high roller, that's a monster, and that's going to be an amazing sort of elite 100 player type field. Probably great TV on that one. And a special Poker Hall of Fame bounty tournament, which has a kind of a curious thing where I think if you knock out the Hall of Famer, you win the amount of money that corresponds to the year they were inducted, something like that. Dara, have you heard about this?
I haven't actually heard about it. No, it does sound like an interesting idea. It also sounds like they're finally getting on the sort of whole rise of the high rollers. They have kind of resisted that apart from the charity tournaments. I'm sure we're going to hear a rant from Phil Hellmuth any day about how this is allowing people to buy a bracelet so they can play a small.
Not the WSOP.
But yeah, you said I'm planning to go. I'm actually a little bit on the fence. I'm waiting to see what the travel restrictions are. As of right now, you can't travel from where I am to where the WSOP will be without spending 2 weeks in somewhere like Mexico first, and I'm definitely not spending 2 weeks in a quarantine hotel just to get into the States. So if that's still the case, come WSOP, I will be sitting this one out. If it's not, I'll probably just go for the main event maybe and a couple of events before that. I'm definitely not going for the full series.
That's my plan. The main event and nothing else, or just nothing at all, to be honest. I don't think I wouldn't mind traveling and going for like a week or something like that. But I did last time I went to Vegas, like a month and a half or something like that. It was too long.
Yeah, it's too long. And with the main being at the end, there's always the day.
Yeah,
be burned out by the end.
For sure. Yeah, so just go down for a week, you know, see some friends, see some people, have a good time, have a few nice nights out, and, you know, win the main.
Yeah. Don't get a mutation of COVID, and it's all good.
Exactly.
Look, the 2021 World Series of Poker is going to be broadcast for the first time in a long time on CBS Sports. That's the new broadcasting partner, ESPN No More. They're offering increased coverage this year for the duration of the series. I think they're doing 18 events, which is kind of cool to see 18 side events play out. There's also going to be 15 hours of main event coverage, so they're making quite a big package show for that. In years recently, that's become a smaller and smaller thing, but they're going to do quite a lot of that. I think it's a 2-day final table is planned, and I guess we're going to see a lot of that on CBS. So that's sort of end of an era, but I imagine they might try and assemble most of the same team back together again in terms of what we're used to watching from the point of view of the viewer, same commentators and all that good stuff. We hope anyway, we'd love to see Lon and Norm and Jamie back in the booth, maybe, with some of those other guys on the streams. I know you've done some of those streams with Tuckman, Dara.
Indeed, yeah. And Tuckman's always great fun to commentate with.
I've done a decent amount of commentating with Tuckman too. Yeah, big fan.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite co-commentators.
Yeah, he's a great dude. Well, speaking of live poker and maybe the return of live poker as it might be for us if we go to the World Series, Dara, your strategy nugget this week is about that.
Yeah, I boasted on the last few shows that I did zero preparation for this segment. I have actually done a little bit of work on this in the form of a conversation I had with one of my coaching students yesterday about the return of live poker, and he'd had a sort of a debate in his group about how you should adjust from sort of GTO world to when you go out to play against weaker recreational players. And one camp says you want to play more hands, therefore open a much wider range and use smaller size because of that. And the other side of the camp was like, no, you actually want to play a tighter range because, if you open ace jack under the gun, you can get away with that. Or sorry, king jack under the gun, you can get away with that because people will fold, better hands behind. But if they're not going to do that, then you actually want to have a tighter range, but use a bigger size to exploit the fact that they're calling too wide. Which camp do I fall into? Now, my answer was I actually kind of fall into both camps. I think you can do either. I think they're both good plans in their own right. But I also think that if the players are particularly weak and they're not really paying too much attention, you could actually split your size where, you're opening 8-6 suited for the smaller size, but you're opening ace queen or ace king for the bigger size. And you're basically exploiting both of the types of mistakes they make. The reason why you shouldn't be able to get away with opening a hand like 8-6 suited or, a small pocket pair in early position is there'll be too many of those hands in your range and they should start 3-betting you relentlessly. If that's not going to happen, then you can definitely get away with opening all those hands. And you presumably will have a fairly big edge over them post flop. And that's where the real money is made.
I like that. I think that's a really nice, neat adjustment to make. Tonka, you don't play a lot of live poker. Actually, for somebody who's played as much poker as you, it's been 99.999% online.
I play Trickle Live.
I know you sprinkle it. We've met at many live events.
I came up playing live.
Maybe
I started playing I started playing when I first started playing poker. I mean, I played a little bit underage with my dad and I, but just online. But when I was 18, I first started going to the casino, and I spent a year and a half playing 1-2 before I even really moved to the online world at all.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. Very poor. I'm going to sack my research team, which is me, on that one. But I just want to ask, when you do, venture out into the live arena, do you make any kind of broad stroke adjustments? Because I guess that's what this is from Dara.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a different game. And I think when I was young and I was more of an idiot, I was just fuck this live game. I used to not really make it a consideration that I would need to play differently, but it's just a very different game. It's rare that I'll find a situation to fold queens or kings pre-flop in an online scenario, but I'll feel pretty confident doing that live. And just to touch on what Dara was saying, in terms of those two ways to play, I feel you play tight. The reason for playing tight will be very rare, and you would need multiple crazy whales on your table who are just playing outrageous amounts of hands and giving outrageous amounts of dollars away. And in that scenario, you should definitely tighten up and take that more tight but rock solid aggro when you got the good hand strategy. But for the most part, in basically all live settings, up to a certain point, of course, but any live setting under 5-10, even 10-20. So majority of people listening playing 1-2 or 2-5, you should definitely open up and play more hands. Because the way that Dara was talking about that, how that's going to be a good strat. If you know what you're doing, if you've studied, if you're competent, playing more hands is almost always going to be the favorable way to go about it at those kind of stakes. But again, that comes with learning up, knowing what's going on, heading on over to DTO, the app, and getting some hands in, and then also supplementing that with bbcpoker.com. a lot of good content. I don't know how this has turned into this troll, but no, seriously, I think playing aggressive and playing more hands is generally the way to go at low stakes, weaker cash games for sure. And it's only the case where if you have some crazy folks that you really want to be taking that tighter strat that Dara was talking about.
Excellent stuff. Well, on that note, I am going to bid thee a farewell. It has been lovely having you on the show, Parker. Even if it was only for half the show, it was definitely the best half, Dara, wasn't it? It was much nicer when he was here.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call us the warm-up act. We were sort of the barely keep them alive act until the
Yeah, mind you, I don't think we shilled quite as hard until he arrived.
Like I said, I don't even do that kind of shit. I just honestly, I genuinely did it for the laugh the first time. Like that wasn't a joke. Like I knew that you guys would be. I mean, and then it just is what it is.
I think we got a lesson. We got out-shilled, which I'd never expected to happen on our own show. But
okay. On that note, Dara Kearney, you've been brilliant as usual. Parker, TonkaaaaP Talbot, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.